Hello, and welcome to today's episode. I'm Sumner Macon, a partner at Bain Company, where I lead the firm's work on AI in the UK. Today, I'm very pleased to be joined by Andrew Grill, a former IBM Global Managing Partner and international best-selling author. He's the author of this book, Digitally Curious, which I've been reading, a book that explores how leaders can adopt maybe a bit more of a curious mindset. Andrew, it's brilliant to have you here on the podcast.
Sumner, great to be here, and I'm glad you've got the book, and I'm glad you're becoming more digitally curious.
Thank you. Reading it, I was curious about your own origin. I understand you started as an engineer, but that's very different from being a global managing partner. Where did it start?
Well, the book describes in the opening chapters that age around 6, I was doing electronic experiments with my father, Ron, sitting on the ground in our home in Adelaide and wiring up little lights. And we found that if you wired them in one particular way, they were quite dim. And if you wired them in parallel, they glowed brightly. And Dad would say to me, "So why do you think that is?" And I go, "I don't know." He said, No. Why do you think that is? And at age 6, that really spawned my curious nature. And I think I've been curious my whole life. Even yesterday, even today, I'll see something and I'll go, "Why is that so?" And I'll either ask someone or I'll use AI to look it up. But I'm constantly curious. And so later in life, I did an engineering degree and I was curious to understand how could I apply what I'd learned in engineering to broader topics, to work in business development, to work in sales, to work in management. And a bunch of startups, bunch of telcos, Telstra, Optus in Australia, did a lot of work in the mobile space, which actually got me to London about 20 years ago with some work we were doing with Vodafone. A bunch of startups after that, and then a stint, as you said, at IBM, where I really had an intersection of my love of technology with education. Simon Sinek often asks, "What's your why?" I think my why is to teach. Not that I'm a teacher, but I'm probably an educator, where I've worked out, and if you've read some of the book, you'll see that the book Digitally Curious is designed to make any technology accessible. And so I've spent my career, my life learning about technology, being an engineer. And I think what I'm able to do at that very senior level is make technology accessible, make it understandable, make it fun, and more importantly, make people curious to want to know more.
So what does it actually mean to be digitally curious as a senior exec then? What's that different from just being, I don't know, interested in tech or something more like that?
Yeah. Well, it really is. It comes down to the nature that curiosity is where there's a gap in information. And so being digitally curious is applying that curiosity into new technology. What I've found, and I've advised tens of thousands of executives in my career, is that senior executives say, "Look, we just don't have time. We have an IT department. They're worrying about the IT and the AI rollout. We're leaving it to them." I said, No. You need to lean forward. You need to play with the tech, because when you have that aha moment and you actually do something with a generative AI tool, or you create a podcast using Google's Notebook LM, or you create a voice clone using 11 Labs, you have that moment you go, "Oh my goodness, I didn't know I could do that. If we did this in our business, that's where it could help." And so I generally encourage these executives to play with the tools. You do not have to be a prompt expert. You do not have to be a coder. But you have to be comfortable enough to ask, how could this technology change the trajectory of our business? We don't have to know how a mobile phone system works. We just need to know how it can actually apply ourselves. But imagine if you never touched a mobile phone and you didn't know the power of that utility. You just heard people talking about it. Until you use it, until you understand that this makes you accessible and you can get information at your fingertips. I look back to when I was at university in about 1994. I was the first of my friends to buy a mobile phone. It was a Nokia N1000. It was an analog mobile phone, and it cost about $1,000. And as a student, my friends would say, "Andrew, why did you spend so much money on a bit of tech?" And slowly the network effect took hold, where I could be contacted more easily and people could find me and then give me work. And then slowly my friends said, "Well, maybe we should get one of those." But unless you have that technology in your hands, unless you can see the power of it, you're just a bystander. And with AI, you cannot be a bystander. You have to be an active participant in how it works and how it works for your organization.
So what is it that you love about the technology? What sort of inspires you?
Well, I don't love technology for technology's sake. I mean, obviously, as a futurist, as someone who plays with technology, I'm all over the latest tech. But what really excites me is when technology can actually benefit what you do in your work or your personal life. So, for example, I have used AirTags, I've used Find Me tags for a number of years in my luggage. And in fact, before AirTags existed, there was a thing called a tile. And I worked out if I put one of those in my luggage, and we're talking about 13, 14 years ago, not only could I find out if my luggage had been loaded onto the plane, but as it's coming out in the carousel, I would know whether I should stand there or I could go and get a cup of coffee because it was nearby. Now, I've been doing that for a long time, and I tell my friends, this is a really good use of the tech, and they go, oh, yeah, that's Andrew playing with technology again. Now my friends are telling me, if you buy an AirTag, you know if your luggage has made the plane, and you know if it's on the carousel. It's like, yeah, I've been telling you that for about 13 to 14 years. So slowly people realize that being an early adopter, I'm out breaking all the rules, playing with all the tech. But when it actually comes together and it's like, that bit of tech that Andrew was talking about years ago, that now makes my life easier and I can find my luggage. Famously, a friend of mine flew to Amsterdam and I loaned her my AirTag because she didn't have one. And her luggage got lost. And she knew that it was in Schiphol Airport in the Sea Gates or something, a sea terminal. Yeah. And so she went to British Airways and said, I know where my luggage is. And this is early in the days before lots of people used AirTags. And for her, that was a fundamental change in how technology could make her life easier.
Wow, and it really does, because finding your luggage really does matter rather than being stuck. Has there any times you've had like a sort of a wow moment recently?
Yes, I did. So I've been playing with Agentic AI for a while. And I wondered to myself, now for our listeners, Agentic AI is basically automation. And so you give the AI a task and it goes off and does it. And I was asked to judge an upcoming freelance AI competition. And I was given the scoring sheet. It was an Excel worksheet. I was told, this is how we want you to score, and these different categories are marked between 1 and 5, and here's the categories. And here are the links to all of the entries. There are 37 entries. And I wondered to myself, could I task this to an AI to do on my behalf? So I loaded the Excel worksheet. I gave it an idea of what I was doing, what I wanted to do. And about 40 minutes later, it came back and said, I finished the task. Here's the Excel worksheet. And I went through and I was like, oh my goodness. Not only has it scored that, it's given me judges' notes. And I felt quite concerned that this is too easy. And so I thought, I can't turn in my homework if someone else has done it. So I went through line by line and actually asked the AI, for each of the marks that you gave for each of those categories, I want you to justify why it was you gave it a 3 instead of a 4. And it came back and did that. I then spent an afternoon going through line by line, score by score, checking to see whether I would have scored that. And pretty much I changed 1 or 2 numbers. But I was confident turning in that piece of homework that it was correct. It saved me about a day's worth of work. I think if I had done it, it wouldn't have taken me 40 minutes. It would have taken me 8 or 9 hours to go through that. That for me was a wow moment that, oh my goodness, it can do tasks that would normally take me 10 times longer to a level of accuracy and credibility that is equivalent to me. That was my wow moment recently. And the technology surprises me every single day.
It never seems to be more surprising, faster than it's ever been. Just going back a bit, you've given your background in engineering and then at IBM. What are 1 or 2 things that you've learned from those experiences that you're now using today? Or maybe actually even the opposite, like things you learned then have now had to actually unlearn?
Well, I never let go of the power of things from first principles. As an engineer, we're taught to design things from first principles. I'll give you a very simple example. When COVID hit and all my friends were sent home, suddenly they had problems with their routers, with their modems, with their big TVs and desktop screens. And so one of my friends called me and said, oh, the internet's not working. And I said, well, can you look at the box in the corner, the internet thingy, and tell me if any of the lights are flashing? Oh, no lights are flashing. Well, there's your problem. Until you can fix that, you're not going to have any internet. It's a very basic analysis, but that is first principles. If there's no internet coming to the home, it won't be anywhere else. And I learned that as an engineer. The other thing I learned, and I've given this example several times recently, when I was doing my engineering degree, there was a lecturer called Gunnar Krebs, and he was a taskmaster. He said that before you go in to do an experiment where you take measurement and say the answer is 7 volts, I want you to do the pre-work. I want you to do the analysis. I want you to run through how the experiment should work and what answer you should expect when you're in the laboratory. And we thought, this is extra work. And we go in there, and I'd done the pre-work, and the answer should be 7 volts, and it was 4 volts. And so then you'd use your critical thinking and first principles to say, that's where I went wrong. Now I've got the answer at 7 volts. And 20 years later, I went back to the institution to speak to students. And at the back of the room was Gunnar Creeves, my lecturer. And I singled him out. I said, Gunnar, please, can you stand up? Thank you for teaching us the power of pre-work. Because when you understand what the answer is going to be, you're not surprised when it does or doesn't work. So I then apply that into my work life. And so if there is a business problem, how do we solve that from first principles? Go back to the source. Are we being given the wrong information? Is there something wrong with the technology? And I remember actually at Optus, when I was there working in business development, there was a company called Newbridge Networks who have long gone, and they had supplied some of the switches for Optus's major communications platform. And they're trying to sell us some new equipment. And what they were telling me didn't seem right. And I said, you realize that I'm an engineer, don't you? And they went, you know what you're talking about. So when you ground yourself that you have the understanding and the able to essentially any new technology gets thrown at me, whether it be quantum physics or quantum computing or Web3 or AI or agentic, because I've learned how to assess it and I've got the understanding from the technology side, I can then take it apart, I can understand it, and importantly, I can then explain it to a non-technical audience. So that power of first principles, that power of pre-work, it really has stayed with me in my whole career.
And that explaining that to things to a non-technical audience, being able to tell stories, feels like somewhat of a superpower at the moment. Communication just seems incredibly important. How do you sort of move people from maybe wanting to, they know AI is sort of really important, but they really haven't started the journey properly. Maybe they've brought up ChatGPT, but not gone much further. How do you even approach that?
Middle of last year, I was talking to a family-run business in Carlisle in the mid-north of the UK. And I was warned on the way in that the CEO of this family-run business, 5th generation, was quite precious about the fact that it's a family business and people are at the heart of what they do. They sell industrial products. So I knew this was going to be tough and there'd be a skeptical audience. And he had his 17 different department heads there. So as I normally do before I engage with any clients, I say, well, what can you tell me about your business? Well, we've just done a SWOT analysis of the whole company, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I said, what format's that in? It's an Excel worksheet. Well, send it to me. And they did. So when I got into the session, I said, who's responsible for analyzing this very large 17,000 cell Excel worksheet? It was Ian in the front row, the chief strategy officer. I said, well, Ian, how long did it take you to analyze that? It took me 10 days. And I said, Ian, I've got some bad news for you. While I was ironing my shirt this morning to come here, I put that spreadsheet into my AI tool and I asked it, what are the opportunities per department for this organization in AI? And I then did a live thing and it just kept scrolling up the screen with all the things. We then spent the next 3 hours going through department by department what the opportunities were. Most of them, yeah, we could do that. And we actually set in place their next 12-month plan. The CEO that was initially skeptical went, oh my goodness, I get it now. He had 8 pages of notes by the first coffee break. And he was like, we are doing this. I now get it because you showed me how quickly. The HR director nearly hugged me because she said, we've just done a pulse survey to look at the whole temperature of the employees. You mean I can put that spreadsheet into AI and get some intelligence back? Yes. Wow. These people had no idea that AI could do that. They thought it was good for getting out of parking fines and tidying up emails. They didn't realize that it could become a decision partner and it could actually be someone who could analyze information. And here's the thing about AI. It works at speed and scale. Yes, it took Ian 10 days to do that. It took me 2 minutes because I was using AI's speed and scale. So I use that storytelling of that story and other stories and show them in person, show them in real time how their data can be transformed into insight.
Given you're improving, meaning that people can do the job that they were doing much, much faster and better, there are at the moment quite a few fears about people losing their jobs to AI. And in your book, you talk about reframing that and maybe focusing on what you love and automating the rest. How does that land with people?
It is a a mnemonic. It's a way of describing things that people just get. So think of your job in what you do at BCG. Think of my job. Think of it as a series of tasks, and you can slice those tasks. You can then find out what parts of your job, what of those tasks can you automate, and what of those need your human touch. So as you said, focus on what you love and automate the rest. That's then not job loss. That's task displacement. And let me tell you, when we look at redesigning how work gets done, we may find that some of those low-level tasks should never have been there. Someone approving something that an AI could have talked to another AI, that actually takes out that step that is so inefficient. Think about how even at your organization, you get expenses approved. You have to show the receipts, put it into some system, and your manager has to take probably 2 or 3 hours a week out of their job to analyze and approve that. That is a waste of their time when AI can do part of that. Does that mean everyone loses their job? No. It means actually some of the stuff that we don't like doing, we can actually slice off to automate. That's a win in my book. However, there's a phrase that many people say that, AI won't take your job. Someone who knows how to use it will take your job. Some of that is true, but actually AI will demand better humans. We're going to need better judgment. So AI gives you the information very, very quickly, speed and scale.
Yeah.
When you have that information, what are you going to do with it? You've got near perfect information. If you can't act on that in an ethical, human, empathetic way, then you're going to be left behind. And so I'll give you an example. In a hospitality environment, if we know everything about someone who's in front of us, about to sit down for a meal, but we don't use that information, then it's wasted. But if the humans that are the link between the what I call invisible intelligence and the person in front of you can give you a better experience because of that information, that means you have to be smarter at your job because the information is better information. And that's going to really show up humans, I think, because we're going to have to up our game. We don't do the boring stuff. We're doing the stuff that we love, but we're going to have to be better at that.
A lot better at it. Because just the volume at which you have to make those decisions is so much higher. And yes, it can automate what you're doing while you're doing something much more interesting. But then it seems like the sort of cognitive overhead or overload can be a real thing.
But you can offload some of that. And as I said, use AI as a decision partner. So I'm not suggesting it does all the thinking for you. I'll give you an example, another story. I love storytelling. The other day I was putting a proposal into a client. I'm sure you do that every day. Now, the thing is, the client is actually someone I've known for 15 years. They're a friend. They're also CEO of the organization. And so the AI said to me, Andrew, would you like to see how this proposal will land emotionally because of the relationship you have with this person? I went, I hadn't thought about that. In my 25 years of consulting, maybe longer, I really haven't thought about how emotionally someone would actually receive it because the AI picked up that we had a friendly relationship. We've been friends for 15 years. It knew that was a lever that it could pull. I'd never thought about it that way. I used it as a decision part. I said, yes, absolutely. Tell me how it will land. And guess what it said? It said the final part of your presentation where you talk about invisible intelligence, that will land the best. And as I'm closing the meeting, as I said, and this is an example of invisible intelligence, she smiled. The AI was right. It knew that part would land emotionally.
So, but for our listeners, what is invisible intelligence?
Well, invisible intelligence, and look at it in a hospitality situation. So I walk through the door. I'm a regular customer. I like my normal seat. I like my normal wine. I normally come with 3 or 4 people, and I like to dine on a Thursday. That's intelligence that's in the system, but it's invisible intelligence because the client doesn't know that you have that information. It assumes that the client may assume that you have this somewhere, but if it gets presented at the point of inspiration, the point to delight the customer, maybe on the table, the tablet as you're taking the order, it flashes up some things about this invisible intelligence to give the client a better experience. That's invisible intelligence, but only AI can do that because you can't sit down and look at the 50 times they've been into the restaurant and all the wines they're like. You can't scale it as a human, but you can with AI and it becomes invisible intelligence.
Wow. It seems like we're going into a whole different world. We've seen some headlines about CEOs maybe even stepping down because they feel they're not quite the right person to lead an AI transformation because it is so fundamental. What does that tell you about the sort of kind of leadership and decision making we need in this new time?
Well, you mentioned CEO stepping down. Recently, the CEO of Coca-Cola and Walmart have both said, we are the wrong people to take the organization forward. Now, they've been through COVID. They've been through a digital transformation. We went from paper-based forms to online. They now realize that AI is going to fundamentally change how we get work done. We will have to completely reimagine work. And they're saying we're not the right people for that. So you need people that aren't just AI savvy. It's not because they can write a better prompt than someone else. They understand taking the technology away. When you know the power of AI, what does that mean for the role? If you're displacing some of these tasks and automating those low-level tasks, and you need smarter humans, what does it mean for a workforce? What does that mean for hiring? What does that mean for how we actually assess competency and assess progression and promotion and payment, compensation? All these things are things that when you reimagine the whole organization, this is the thing, I tell people they need to reimagine how work gets done, but I don't know exactly what they have to do because every company is different. And so these CEOs have said it's not a case of we're not AI savvy. We realize this is a fundamental change to our business. We're not the right people to lead that. We need someone who is comfortable with change.
What do you look for then in someone who is more comfortable with change? Like, how do you know that this is someone who is going to be able to have that sort of level of creative thinking and ability to see beyond the horizon?
So if I was recruiting someone at the C-suite, CEO, board member, chair today, I'd ask them two questions on top of what I would normally ask them. First of all, how do you stay curious? And if they think long and hard and reflect on the question, you know they're curious. And secondly, what do they do with AI? Now, not again, do you use it to get out of parking fines and what have you, but have you tried Agentic AI? Have you pushed all the buttons to see what it can do so that you then understand that the sort of candidate that you need, and hopefully it's the person sitting in front of you, knows that there is a fundamental step change in how the organization has to perform. And you then go, okay, they get it. They get the step change. They understand the technology. They understand the need to be curious, the need to be digitally curious, and need to bring that with them. And a lot of work that I do is at that board chair level. And I think that's actually where it should start. Because if the board gets it, if the chair drives the board to get it, it then becomes much easier. But this means that the board and the chairs and the C-suite have to be digitally curious. They have to be getting their hands dirty with the technology to absolutely understand what it means. Like I said, you can no longer be a bystander. You have to be actively involved in this, or you can't possibly understand the transformational capabilities of it.
Really not, and particularly when this AI transformation could have costs of hundreds of millions and actually the impact be much, much greater. How do you help those sort of senior leaders make sure they're investing in the real thing, the right problems, and not just the latest hype?
Well, part of it is they are active participants in the solution. So rather than sitting back and going, well, that sounds like a lot of money and it's OpenAI involved and Microsoft, it ticks all the boxes. But what is it? Here's you step back and you ask yourself, what problem are we solving? Do we need AI boots and all to solve that problem? And also as an organization, what makes us special? What levers do we have to pull? And if we know that we can use technology and reimagining the way we get work done, how can that actually benefit what we're doing? Because you're right, an AI transformation, technology aside, is expensive because you're changing processes and people. But what we're seeing this year, that Uber have already exhausted their $3 billion budget for AI tokens. So each time you ask a question and put a question mark, it burns through more and more tokens. And Uber have already exhausted their budget. So they're finding, along with a lot of other people, that this is expensive. And as you have bigger demands on AI tools and they have to work faster and harder, it costs money to run that. It costs the AI tool makers money. It costs them GPU cycle time. It costs them development time, energy, water, all that sort of stuff. And so it is not cheap. So you can't just say, oh, it's doing AI, because then you're writing a blank check. What problem are you solving? What makes you special? And what part of this can we solve with AI? And what I advise people to do is to start small and then scale fast. Solve a simple issue. Understand where you can do that. Understand where the data is ready yet to be used with AI, and then scale that. And what I find is that I'm generally brought in at that very senior level because the organization is nervous. They're hearing in the media what's happening with AI. They're hearing from the competitors what they're doing with AI. All their staff are using it. And they are in this blind spot where they're not comfortable with it, but they're being asked to recommend it. And this situation has been around for years. I mean, when cloud came about and people were being asked to spend tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars on cloud infrastructure and moving things to the cloud, I bet you most of the people making those decisions had never spun up a cloud instance. They'd never actually played with it because it's hard.
It is hard.
What ChatGPT did on November 30th, 2022, was they made AI tools accessible to anyone. My 90-year-old father in Adelaide, Australia, is playing with AI tools because he can send a text message, so he can actually talk to an AI tool. Back with cloud and those sorts of things, they're hard to spin up, but AI is accessible. Unless people play with it, they've got no idea what it can do.
No idea at all. There are lots of futurists out there painting various pictures of what things might look like, but you call yourself the actionable futurist. I quite like that idea. We want to deliver some results, not just have a nice conversation. What does that mean to you, though? What does actionable mean in terms of the way you talk to people and think about making stuff happen?
The way I take it to market, and it's actually in the book. So as you've been flicking through the book, every chapter ends with what I call the Curious Five.
Yeah.
You've read the chapter. Here are 5 things you can go and do. The first one's easier. The second one gets harder. Every single time I'm on stage, my last slide before a QR code with resources is, here are 5 things you need to do tomorrow to actually do that. And so I actually said this last Thursday. I was on stage in front of 300 people that were in a membership organization. And someone asked me a question. They said, well, how do you define success? And I said, this is not meant to be arrogant. I'll get off stage and I'm sure someone will come up to me and say, loved your talk. And I'll say, thank you. But what will you do differently? Because if it's just, it was a nice talk and there's no action, it's theatre. And theatre doesn't drive results. So what I want people to do when they engage with me, they see me, they watch a video, they listen to this podcast, I want to ask them, if I could, what will you do differently as a result of what I said? And if you have done something different, it's actionable. Now, I love my futurists. I was with a bunch of futurists yesterday for lunch, and most of them there look at the window of 20 to 50 years. And that's fantastic. And I've learned so much from them. However, insight without action is just theatre.
Yeah.
And so what I've found is there is a gap in the market that I can fill where people come to me and say, Andrew, we need to close the quarter. We need to plan for next year. We know AI is important. Can you lead us through what we need to do today? And importantly, can you give us a list of 5 things we can do? That's actionable. It's measurable. And for me, that's the brand of futurism that I want to practice so that people get something out of it. Now, if you're a purist, you might say, well, how can a futurist be working on something to close the quarter? It is about, the quarter is in the future. I'm a short-term futurist. I'm an actionable futurist because I want you to have results before you look too far ahead.
Yeah, and things are changing so fast. I mean, if you're going too far out, then anyone's...
we still need that. We still need foresight. We still need planning. We still need predictions as to where things might go. But unless you fill in the gap, that will never happen because no one will ever do it.
Yeah, no one will ever do it. So in addition to sort of the keynotes you mentioned, you believe you also do sort of executive courses, boot camps, roundtables, sort of closed door board sessions. What have you learned about the things that really do change behavior and decision makers this quarter rather than the theatre that you described?
You make it actionable. And so every room is different. Every organization, every industry is different. So I spend a lot of time understanding my audience. And what I often do, and this is quite useful, is before I get in front of them, I send them a readiness survey. It's an online survey, might be 10 questions about where they're at. It does a couple of things because the latest version of this actually gives them a score about where they are on their AI journey. The second thing is it gives me data about where is everyone in the room. So I walk into that room armed with invisible intelligence about what's in front of me. I then use that raw spreadsheet, like I did with the SWOT analysis, to build a view of what is this room, what is this organization, what is this group, where are they, and where can we take them? And so that's so important to make it real and make it actionable. And what they are looking for is to leave that room, whether it be a 45-minute keynote or a 2-hour closed-door session or an ongoing boot camp. They want a shopping list. They say, Andrew, we need to take something out of this room that we can actually apply today, tomorrow, next week. And that's what I do. But it then becomes localized. So if it's an insurance company, we then work about what their advisors can do. If it's a board group of board people, we see how they could maybe have an AI board member to actually ingest some of the board papers to help an AI board member help them make better board decisions. And because I'm on a board, because I've been a CEO, because I've done almost every job up the rungs of the ladder, I'm not afraid to explain how this might impact their role. And also, because I worked at that senior level, they see me as a peer. And my time at IBM taught me, I'll digress slightly. Someone said to me, Andrew, why are you so comfortable around senior executives? Well, one, I'm nearly 60, so I'm often the age of some of these people. But at the age of 29, I joined the Rotary Club of Sydney. Now, at that time, I was the youngest member there. Generally, Rotary clubs are for older people. And every Tuesday, we would meet at a hotel and we'd have a guest speaker and we'd have fellowship. But I got to mix with people that were 40, 50, 60 years old. These were captains of industry in Sydney. And so I got to become very comfortable around senior people. And so when I joined IBM as a partner, I was alongside my peers that had been coming up the ranks from PwC, and they were very serious, very experienced partners. But throw them in a board meeting or in front of a CEO, and it's like, oh my goodness, we're in front of the CEO of British Airways. For me, it was, hi, Alex, let me see how I can solve your problem. And they're like, Andrew, how did you do that? How did you charm the board to go from arms folded to when are we doing a pilot? Because I wasn't selling them something. I was anticipating what they needed. And when it comes to these really new technologies like AI, and people are threatened by them, if you can actually go in there as a peer and you can say, I've done your job before, I've been a CEO, I'm on a board, I get where you're at. Let me give you what I know as a peer. And they go, thank goodness for that. Someone who understands how difficult our role is, but will tailor the information and the advice to exactly our role and where we're in the organization. And that is so important. There are lots of people out there, and this is the theater. They go and do the same talk or the same presentation every time. Every single one of my talks is absolutely different. It has to be, because you've got to tailor it to the audience in front of you.
It's really helpful. I understand some of your talks, you use the sort of Where's Wally example as a parable for finding signal in noise. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
This is a thing I came across a couple of years ago that just works. Those listeners out there that are of a certain age will remember Where's Wally. If you're in the US, it's Where's Waldo. Waldo is a tall character. He is dressed in a red and white striped top. He has a cane and a red and white striped beanie. And the illustrator, these are late 80s, early 90s cartoons, would hide Wally in amongst a sea of noise, other similar looking people. And as a child, I would spend hours trying to find Wally. And so the analogy I give is, think of a beach scene where Wally's on the beach with all these other people. Imagine that beach is your organization or your industry or your market. It's full of noise. And you want to find the gold in there. You want to find the Wally that's buried inside there. So being curious, one day I took that photograph, I put it into my AI, I said, find Wally, and put a red circle around him. And to my utter amazement, 2 seconds later, there's Wally. If AI can find Wally in a sea of noise, it can find your Wally, your gold in your sea of noise. And that analogy absolutely hits home. When I do it, people come off stage, people go, I get it now. I get how we can find the Wally. So back to storytelling, let's use a story that everyone knows that doesn't dumb it down, but it makes it understandable, makes it accessible to anyone. And even if you haven't heard of Wally or Where's Waldo, the whole notion of finding signal in the noise is something that everyone wants to do.
Absolutely. I think there's also a fear of being sort of left behind as these systems seem to be changing more and more. How do you help people who they just feel it's coming faster and thicker than it ever has been?
Well, I get asked to go on the BBC all the time. So the audiences there are generally mid-morning radio. So these are people driving to and from work with their kids, people that are consumers, and they're not technologists. So I love those audiences because they really test me, because they're asking the questions that everyone wants the answers to. And back to being digitally curious, just try it. So most people have tried ChatGPT. And so I suggest to them, I do this on radio. Next time you do a prompt, add one extra line and justify your answer. Why would you do that? The AI then works harder. It shows you where the sources were, and you might actually be able to see how it's thinking about solving the problem. And you can then go, that's how I would have solved it. And something as simple as that gets people from, I'm afraid of it to, that's a top tip that will actually get me to have a better answer. So it's about trying it. And I give a lot of examples, depending on my audience, about what they should be doing to just go from scared to aha.
That's a nice moment, that aha moment. You feel got somewhere. You're clearly a curious person, otherwise you wouldn't have written a book about it and told about these fantastic stories. I'd love to know a bit more about your own productivity stack. Like, what tools do you rely on? And particularly now, I mean, in the book you mentioned a few, but I'd be really keen to understand, like, what should I be trying? And indeed everyone else who's listening.
So you want to use whatever tool you're comfortable with. So, there's ChatGPT, there's Claude. I use Perplexity because a couple of reasons. One is now that all my stuff is in there. So it's a bit hard for me to leave and move everything across because I have these spaces in there. So when I'm preparing for a podcast or a client meeting, everything's in there. Because everything's in there, I can then go back and ask it questions about what it knows about the stuff we've talked about before. I use Otter. Otter is a transcription tool. The book actually could not have been written without Otter because it contains 60 podcast guests. That's nearly 60 hours of audio. So I used Otter to transcribe the audio, to give me the words. I could then use the GPT inside Otter to then say, for example, where's that soundbite from the guy at IBM talking about quantum? And to jump to it. So my productivity stack, if I look at a high level, it'll be Perplexity for my AI, and I use deep thinking. So I push the deep thinking, deep research button, so it thinks a lot harder. I use Otter AI to transcribe meetings, and I then use the output of that into AI tools. I use another one that is not necessarily AI, it's called raindrop.io. It's a bookmarking tool. So I'll be on LinkedIn, and that's like, that was great. I haven't got time to read it in full, but I want to go back to it. So I'll clip it. It goes into raindrop.io, which means I can access it on all my devices. And the developer has now got an AI tool. So I can say, summarize all the stuff I clipped this week or last month and give me a summary of what I should look at. So in terms of productivity, I have to, in my job, source and find and analyze so much information. And I often, where was it that I found that? It all is in the one place. I can then use that. So there's some top tips that I use. They just make my life easy. And the question should be, if we turned those off, if they went away tomorrow, could you do your job? I could do it, but it would take me a lot longer and my insights wouldn't be as good.
I've got a 1-year-old son, and I'm kind of wondering, what world is he coming into? I know it's very difficult to know, but I'm super curious how I should be preparing him.
I was asked that on stage the other week. I was at an AWS event and we had the Q&A, and a young mother said, same thing. She had a 7 or 8 year old. What should I be doing? And I said, there are 3 things you should be preparing them for. First of all, start them off being critical thinkers. The example I gave at the top of our podcast about me playing with the lights with my father, Ron, he was encouraging me to be a critical thinker at a very young age. And that's so important in the age of AI because the answer comes out. What is the answer? How did you get it? Is it right? Secondly, is become comfortable as a public speaker. Now, I do this for a job, but in every job, you have to convince someone using a story to approve a budget, to get a promotion, to get a job, to buy a certain thing. And so if you can become very comfortable as a presenter, doesn't mean you have to be on stage in front of thousands of people like me. That is a skill that not everyone has. And the third thing is become comfortable with AI tools. If you have those 3 together, it doesn't matter what gets thrown at you, how work evolves, you'll be in front.
As things continue to evolve, how do you keep yourself curious?
I read widely. Also have a lot of people on my podcast. I've had the Digitally Curious podcast for the last 7 years. And actually yesterday I signed up 2 new guests. Day before I grabbed another Futurist on the podcast. I literally was editing that before I came onto this one as well. I learn so much from other people that are much smarter than me. And I ask curious questions. And the whole book, I became more and more curious about all these different topics in there because I had access to all these experts. So I read widely, I question things, I go to events. I'm the first person to put up my hand and ask a question. I am incredibly curious, which helps me in my day job because people ask questions of me. And what surprises me, when I do a 45-minute keynote, we then have time for Q&A. I love that bit because I've got no idea what they're going to ask me. And I test myself. Could I answer eloquently, authentically, any question thrown at me? And my goodness, it really tests you, and you've got to be on top of your game. You've got to read widely. Otherwise, you couldn't possibly answer that eloquently. It'd be a canned answer with a few stats.
Mm.
But I pride myself in being able to answer any question. In fact, at my talks, I have a bunch of books with me. I say the most curious question gets a signed copy of my book.
Wow. That's awesome. It's been brilliant to hear your insights and to think about how things might be. How can people learn more about you?
So actionablefuturist.com is my sort of HQ for everything there. But I'll test something. If you type in digitally curious, I'm and the book are the one thing that comes up because I seem to have started to own that term. So just search digitally curious. You'll find the podcast, you'll find the book, you'll find my talks, and hopefully you'll find other curious people.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks, Sumner. Great to be on, and I hope you enjoyed the book. And importantly, I hope you pass the book on to someone else who you think could really use the insights in there.
It's a fantastic idea.